Thanks everybody for coming, for showing up and having a chance to learn what we're talking about here. This is Tom Coleman, our acting city manager, will be presenting as well as some of the other folks in the room, and they ask that you hold your questions to the end. So pay attention, there will be a test. There will be several tests actually. And,
Great.
here you are.
All right, thank you, Mark. And thank everyone for coming out tonight. This is the 5th of 9 planned town hall meetings to discuss the referendum process and the projects that are now included in the referendum. Hopefully everyone had a chance to look at the boards before we got started. If not, we're going to go through all the information that was on them as we work through the presentation. So as Mark said, my name is Tom Coleman. I'm the acting city manager for the city of Newark. Normally I'm the public works director. Tonight, we're going to go over some of the more frequently asked questions that we receive about the city's infrastructure and the referendum process. We'll then provide an overview of the projects that are included in the referendum. And after that, we'll move into a financial discussion on why we feel debt makes sense. We'll review the available funding sources and our current and proposed debt service obligations. Then we'll finish up with a question and answer session. So tonight, you'll hear from myself, Dave Del Grande, our finance director, Tim Pulaski, our acting Public Works and Water Resources Director, and Joe Spadafino, the Parks and Recreation Director. So as we move through the night, you'll hear Dave, Tim, and I, and Joe reference the term capital with regard to spending and budgeting. So I wanted to provide a definition. So our charter defines capital as any project or equipment, including any extension or addition thereto or thereof, having a life expectancy in excess of or to be financed over a period greater than 6 years or a value exceeding $20,000. All right, that's great, but what are some examples of capital? So some examples of capital, electric lines, substations, transformers, things like what are listed up here. For us, it's generally going to be infrastructure. That's going to be the majority of our spending, mainly because they're very expensive, and like your house or car, they need to be maintained or replaced periodically. So let me go back. Before we get any further, I wanted to discuss why we're proposing a referendum in the first place. This is something we haven't covered previously, and it was pointed out to me at the last presentation. So we wanted to discuss this before we went into the presentation any further. So per our charter, it's outlined specifically that in order to incur debt, we have to do a referendum. So outside of there are a few very specific items where we can borrow money without needing to go to referendum. But otherwise, if we want to borrow $1 for capital spending, it requires a referendum. Now, it's important to point out that a referendum authorizes the city to borrow money. It does not approve the project directly. Council will still need to approve each project and approve the actual loan documents. So that means there are still more opportunities to have your voice heard. And also, if as you'll see, once we get moving into the discussion a little further, we're going to have some questions that are bundled where there's multiple projects under one question. So if you like the general idea, but there might be one specific project you don't like so much, you can still vote for the bundle and then tell your councilman that you don't want this project, so they shouldn't use debt for that project. So when it comes to them later, they can say, no, we're going to change our mind and we're going to use cash for that one project. So historically, the city has used debt a handful of times, most recently for the construction of the reservoir and upgrades at the South Wellfield water treatment plant, both in the early 2000s. Otherwise, we pay for most everything with cash. So what questions are we going to be voting on? Compared to the last referendum, which was the reservoir in the South Wellfield, the questions this time around are being handled somewhat differently. While we have specific projects identified, outside of the Rodney project, we aren't going to be voting on them individually. Instead, they're going to be bundled together based on the funding source, which is a requirement of our charter. So if it's a different funding source, you have to have a different question. Now, with Rodney, it's a similar funding source to our water and sewer projects, except we're going to pull that one out separately because that was kind of how we discussed doing it the whole time as we worked through the Rodney process last year. So questions 1 and 2 are both for the Rodney project. Question 1 covers the purchase of the land, the demolition of the existing structures, the environmental remediation for the site, construction of the pond, and construction of a single path to get from Dallam Road to the pedestrian tunnel. Question 2 includes all the additional parks amenities, like the walking paths, pavilions, fishing pier, and educational components like an outdoor classroom and educational playground equipment. Both questions 1 and 2 will be financed through the State Revolving Loan Fund program at an interest rate that's been locked in at 2% last year, at the end of last year. Question 3 includes all of our proposed water and sewer utility projects, and they're going to be funded more than likely through the State Revolving Loan Fund program, but we have not locked in financing for those yet, so the interest rate is still variable. We anticipate, or it was still in the 2 to 3% range last time I checked. And question 4 covers all our general fund and parking fund projects. It will likely be financed through a bank loan or general obligation bond, so we don't know the financing interest rate on that yet. We'll go into more detail on all these later on tonight. So when you go to the voting booth, each of these questions will have 2 options, 2 choices. You're either for the bonded certificate of indebtedness issue or against. If you vote for, that means you want to authorize the borrowing. If you vote against, it means you do not want to authorize the borrowing. And this is what the ballot will look like. So I wanted to get this out early just so you know what you're looking at, and you can kind of put what the rest of the presentation will be into perspective as we move through. So how much infrastructure do we have? Well, we have a lot. We have by far the most water infrastructure by a large margin, and most of the items we have are quite expensive. For example, it costs us around $1.2 million to replace 1 mile of small diameter water main, like what's in front of your house. In total, the replacement value of our water infrastructure is around $200 million if we had to replace it all today. That's almost $6,000 of water infrastructure for every resident of Newark, and that's just for water. We also have a lot of sewer infrastructure. The total replacement value for our sewer system is less than the water because it can be more easily rehabilitated without digging up the street in many cases. But we estimate the value is still more than $67 million. Stormwater is even more than sewer. We estimate it's around $100 million. Stormwater is somewhat unique though because we have different pipe materials with dramatically different life expectancies, to the point that we're really only concerned with one type at the moment, and that's corrugated metal pipe, what we refer to as CMP. CMP lasts around 35 to 40 years on average, and we have around 5 miles of it. This is the pipe that's of most concern to us because almost all of it is approaching or beyond the end of its expected life. The rest of our pipe is reinforced concrete or high-density polyethylene, which lasts around 100 years on average. And then in addition to our pipes, we have about 65 city-maintained stormwater ponds and facilities, most of which are in residential neighborhoods. Our electric infrastructure is made up of substations, lines, transformers, and our McKees solar facility off Cleveland Avenue. We estimate the replacement value of our electric utilities infrastructure to be $50 million or more. In addition to our traditional utilities, we have parking infrastructure consisting of our downtown parking lots and meters. So our parking fund, if you didn't know this, is treated the same as a traditional enterprise utility in Newark, like water, sewer, and electric. So its revenues are kept separate from the general fund. So if you pay your water bill, it goes into a pot of money over here. You pay your electric bill, pot of money over here. And then at the end of the year, I guess throughout the year, but we transfer a margin of roughly 20%, 20 cents out of every dollar we receive into the general fund to balance the budget on the general fund side. That's basically our profit margin. Lastly, we have our general fund infrastructure, which includes city-maintained streets, City Hall, the police station, our parks, and other city-maintained facilities. This is the infrastructure that's supported by your taxes, fees, and the margin transfers from the city's various utilities. In total, we estimate the replacement value of our infrastructure and capital assets at around $500 million. Now, that's a huge number considering we're a city of just over 33,000 people. That means we have over $15,000 worth of infrastructure for every resident in the city. And the vast majority of it is underground, or at least out of sight and out of mind, so it's easy to forget about until you hit a pothole with your car, like on Main Street. Your toilet won't flush or the lights go out. While it's helpful to know how much of everything we have, it's even better to know what condition it's in so we can start planning. So what's the condition of our infrastructure? I'm going to go through each type in the same order that I just did, and you'll see that we have different levels of information for each one. Starting with water, I'm going to first focus on the water mains because they make up the majority of the assets. With water mains, getting good condition assessment is difficult because they're under pressure. They have to remain in service during the assessment because otherwise it becomes very difficult. You lose water, and we have to do boil water orders for 24 to 48 hours afterwards. So we began, I guess a year or two ago, piloting technologies that indirectly measure the remaining life of a water main, but widespread implementation is still in development. In the meantime, we use a combination of our main break history, water quality complaints, pipe age, pipe material, and industry guidelines to estimate the remaining service life and prioritize replacement. As I'll show in the next slides, a lot of our water mains are going to hit or exceed their expected lifespan and expire in the near future. It's important to point out that expiring does not mean the pipe will stop working though, but I'll explain more on that shortly. So this is what we like to refer to as the bathtub diagram, and it shows the general failure pattern for pipes and other infrastructure. You'll often get a quick round of failures as any manufacturing defects fail early, followed by a long constant failure rate phase. It's usually really low, like maybe a break every 10 years or something. And then at the end of the pipe's life, it enters the wear out phase where the break rate increases. This is often due to corrosion. Now the expected life varies depending on the material and manufacturing methodology. So our pipes that are out in the city are different pipe material based off what age they were. Generally, the older the main, the longer the life, until very recently when we started using different practices to install our pipes. So our oldest mains, like what's on Main Street, are very thick. They didn't have very good technology, so they just made them thick. And the expected life on them is 100 to 120 years. The water main on Main Street was installed in the 1800s. Don't know if you knew that, still in service today. The water mains installed in the middle of the 20th century have a much shorter lifespan, sometimes as low as 55 years, depending on soil conditions. And then water mains that we've installed since 2016 should have a life back up above 100 years because we started actually wrapping them in a plastic wrap, basically a thick plastic that keeps soil off the pipe and reduces the external corrosion. So this slide gets into what I mentioned earlier, which is when a pipe expires. So the green line is the cost to operate an existing pipe. As you can see, kind of the cost increases as the pipe gets older and it begins to fail more frequently. We're out digging up the road, we've got crews in after hours, water shut off. At a certain point, the failure rate gets to a point that it's more expensive to maintain the pipe that's in the ground than it is, coupled with the inconvenience to customers, than it is to replace it. So the break-even age, that depends on a lot of things, like I mentioned earlier, so the pipe material, manufacturing methodology, and the soil conditions, and also where the pipe's located. So is it somewhere where we can do a repair very easily, or is it Main Street, or is it somewhere where we've got lots of road restoration that has to happen? So right now we're working to develop an accurate estimate for the age and remaining life of the 140 miles of pipe. But that's going to take some time. So for the sake of this presentation, we're going to show you information using recommendations from the American Waterworks Association, which is to assume a lifespan of 70 years. We feel that based on the areas we're experiencing failures, this is going to be generally accurate enough for this presentation. So you may or may not be able to tell color on here, depending on how good your eyesight is. But this is a map of our water system with the water mains color-coded based on the expected remaining service life, again, assuming a 70-year life. All the pipes in red have already expired. The pipes in orange, yellow, and light blue are set to expire in the next 15 years. So you can see most of this area is red, and orange and yellow in here, and then all this blue. This light blue here, light blue here, light blue out there, that's all the next 15 years. Now, one thing I want to point out, some of these pipes, like the one on Main Street I mentioned earlier from the 1800s, we actually relined that pipe back in the early 2005, I think. And to be honest, I think it's probably fine. And then we've got some other pipes out in some of these light blue areas that are probably worse than 15 years. So try not to focus so much on the exact street by street and more on the general magnitude. So here's the same data, except broken out. A little easier to see. So today, only around 15 miles of our pipe are expired, which equates to about 12% of our system. Looking at all the pipes in the distribution system, which is after the water treatment plant, 15 years from now, that number is going to be 74 miles, absent a continued or increased effort to replace mains. That's over half the system. It'll be 59 miles, even if we hit our current target of replacing 1 mile a year. That's 42% of the system. And this doesn't count our raw water pipes that carry untreated water and are in a similar condition. Based on a recent study by Utah State University, the nationwide average is 16% expired, so we're currently doing a little better than average, but that's going to change considerably in the next 10 to 15 years. Nationally, the percentage of expired pipes has doubled since 2012 from 8 to 16%, and the break rate of cast iron pipe, which makes up a very large portion of Newark's pipe infrastructure, has increased 46% over that same term. So you're seeing as these pipes are aging out, they're starting to break a lot more often. So what does that mean for Newark? Well, we should plan for more main breaks and interruptions in service. So here we've charted the number of main breaks we have every year going back to 1977, which is the first year we have records. You can tell there's a definite trend there, which is going to accelerate as we get more pipes into that expired category. Each one of these breaks is accompanied by a service outage and occasionally a boil water order. These outages have a negative effect on the quality of life and, if near a business, on their revenue. Like I said earlier, they don't stop working, they just stop working well. So moving on from water mains, starting around 2011, the city began increasing our water rates from the historically, low rate that was in place prior to that, which allowed us to start a real capital initiative and where we ramped up our spending and started to address some of our deferred maintenance. Now, while water mains make up the majority of our infrastructure, all of our other water facilities have a much shorter life, so they have to be replaced more often, so they kind of punch above their weight in that regard. So we've been really busy over the last 7 years, and we've completed over $17 million in water capital fund projects, so that's where a lot of your water rates are going. We also have 2 water treatment plant projects that are currently underway, or we expect to be completed in the next 12 months, one at each plant, both relatively large projects. On the sewer side, we've been working to inspect and develop a prioritization for our rehab work. So far we've inspected around 15% of our sewer system, and we've identified $4 million of high priority repairs. We began making many of the repairs in 2017, and we have another project underway right now. Since 2011, we've spent nearly $4 million on sewer capital projects, and we've rebuilt all of our sewer pump stations to modern standards. On the stormwater side, we've been focused on corrugated metal pipe, like I mentioned earlier, because it has that short service life. And starting in 2016, we completed a citywide condition assessment of all the known corrugated metal pipe in the city, and then we prioritized it for repairs. In total, we identified $3.4 million of repairs that need to be made over the next 10 years or so. As many of you may or may not be aware, on your utility bill starting in January, there was a new line. It was a stormwater bill. Because of that stormwater utility, we actually factored this corrugated metal pipe repair into that initial rate. So that rate's been set. So at least over the next 5 years, we already have the money to complete all the repairs that we've identified. That current rate will not cover the cost of the Rodney project that we're going to discuss tonight. So as currently proposed, if question 1 and 2 are approved, it'll increase that rate about $1 a month or so. For our road network, we have a full pavement management system where we complete a full inspection of all the roads in the city every year. We rate the roads, and then we run them through an optimization program to try and develop an optimal project for price. If we're to keep our city-maintained roadways at their current condition, average condition citywide, we need to spend around $1.75 million a year. That's a number we've only hit 1 time since 2011. So the trend on our streets is kind of the same as everything else. It's getting worse over time. And we also have about $1.5 million in parks capital maintenance scheduled over the next 5 years. So how did we get ourselves into this position? Well, using only cash, like I mentioned earlier, we only had a few referendums, a handful here and there. That limits our ability to tackle large projects. So we have a lot of deferred projects that have been just pushed from year to year. Or if you get a large project that actually comes through, it crowds out everything else. It takes all the air out of the room, especially preventative maintenance types of projects. Because it's a lot more fun to go out and cut a ribbon than it is to replace a pipe that's worked fine basically your entire lifetime. Our water and sewer rates are also entirely based on consumption. So it fluctuates wildly from year to year. Recently, we've had a few wet years in a row, and our water utility has underperformed $3 million over the last 3 years in revenue. Water and sewer. And that's all money that could have gone towards addressing with our infrastructure. In addition to that, nearly 50% of Newark's land is tax exempt, which puts us in a huge hole when it comes to paying for our general fund services like the police. We fill this by that 20% margin transfer from all our utilities, except stormwater. Stormwater is the only one that we don't do a margin transfer, and that's all money that could have been used for infrastructure maintenance. The biggest issue that we're facing, though, above and beyond all of them, is that we're entering the first round of the replacement era. Historically, we've not had to pay for most of the infrastructure we have because it was paid for by developers or the federal government through grants. We're now approaching the first replacement cycle for most of our assets, which can really be thought of as liabilities because we don't have a choice but to fix them. Even the mains installed by or for the city were originally assessed directly against the adjacent property owners. Because of this, our rate and tax structure has never had to pay for most of the infrastructure. And our revenue demands are going to increase significantly over the next 20 years as these things start to wear out and we have to actually start replacing them ourselves. So in addition to that, a large majority of Newark's been developed in an unsustainable development pattern. That's suburban single-family style homes. If you live in a single-family detached home, don't get offended, I can almost guarantee you're not paying enough to cover the infrastructure necessary to support your house based on our current utility rate structure and tax levels. For example, if you live in a house with a 100-foot wide lot, your taxes need to support, in addition to police and our other general fund expenses, the paving and maintenance of at least 50 feet of that road frontage. Same goes for water, sewer, and electric infrastructure. So using our current costs for water main replacement as an example, 50 feet of water main replacement costs $11,000. Assuming 10% of your water bill goes towards infrastructure, which has been our average historically, it'll take over 300 years to pay off that 50 feet of pipe in front of your house if you're an average water customer. Fortunately, we have locations like our downtown, like this project here on the bottom right, 58 East Main Street, where a house might take over 300 years to pay off their water main. That one will do it every 2 to 3. So we've got these neighborhoods that don't necessarily pay for themselves, and then we've got the downtown that does more than pays for itself. So they need to balance the two. So this is a map that we're developing, still in development, but it shows whether a property is paying enough in taxes or not to cover its general fund services that it gets. Well, it's not complete. The general idea and scope is not likely to be changed significantly when it is. Based on our preliminary estimates, all the parcels in red do not provide enough in tax revenue to cover the cost of providing them with general fund services. You'll see there's a pattern. Some may be closer than others, but they still don't cover the cost. Parcels that have a positive value are shown in yellow, blue, and green, and those are the ones that make up the difference and balance the budget. What you'll see in general, single-family detached housing is negative, which means if we're to approve a new single-family neighborhood today, it will make us poorer as a community, as we'll be taking on more liabilities and revenues. Higher density development like townhomes and downtown mixed use, on the other hand, will help reduce the need for future tax increases because they pay more than their fair share. Now, an important takeaway from this, and I've been trying to say this every time, is if you live in a townhouse or an apartment, I don't want you to stop being friends with people that live in the neighborhoods. It's a reality. I'm not saying that we should get rid of these or raise them or redevelop the neighborhoods, but the first step to addressing an issue is acknowledging that we have an issue. And while we have an issue, this is where we are. So we need to take this into account when we make decisions moving forward. So I know this presentation's been a lot of doom and gloom, but it's not all bad news, and it's definitely not unique to Newark. Cities all across the nation are looking at the same problem, whether they know it or not. Illinois, for example, just determined they need to spend $21 billion a year on infrastructure, when historically they've spent closer to $3 billion. The entire state of Illinois' budget every year is only $38 billion. So you can see what kind of problem they're facing. Fortunately for us, I think we're in a much better place than a lot of other cities for several reasons. Firstly, there seems to be a will on council to actually start addressing this problem. A good example of that is we're actually here talking about it. We're also a relatively compact city compared to our peers. Dover, for example, has 2.5 times the land area. So you can easily extrapolate out, they've got 2.5 times the stuff to maintain. But they only have 10% more people, so they're gonna have to pay a lot more per person to maintain that stuff than we will. We're also in the fortunate position of having the Star Campus, which will be bringing all new revenue to the city very soon. Every private project there is going to bring tax revenue that we haven't seen since the Chrysler site was there, Chrysler was operating. But in addition to that, and the big one is when Chrysler left, That used to be Delmarva's electric territory. Well, Delmarva left with Chrysler. So everything that's built there now will be new electric revenue as well. It will be new sewer sales that we haven't had since Chrysler left. And a large, I guess a corner of the site, probably about a quarter of it, is water sales for us as well. So all that revenue will be new that we haven't seen in at least 10 years, or new altogether. And that can be used to offset rate increases that would be necessary to maintain our infrastructure. A benefit of STAR is all the infrastructure in STAR campus is going to be owned and maintained by the city. So we basically stub up to the site and everything in there is there. So it's new sales and we're not taking on new infrastructure. The only thing that we would need is eventually to add a new substation with a point. Right now the city's fed by one feed into the city for electric. We'd add a second feed at STAR campus that will need to be added eventually, probably when they're about 50% built out. But otherwise, everything is fed by our existing infrastructure. So every 1% we add to the tax base is 1% of tax revenue that can go towards the support of infrastructure that doesn't need to come out of your pockets. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Tim, who will go over the individual projects that are included in the referendum. And then, but before he begins, I do want to point out that all the projects we're going to discuss are in the approved 5-year capital budget, which can be found on the city's website at these links. And they are not new projects. So these are things that we're planning to do either way. So, all right, thank you, Tim.
Just one quick clarification. You said that the STAR campus will be maintained by the city. You meant
Sorry.
it will be maintained by UD. We won't have any responsibility for maintenance once inside the STAR campus. So I just wanted to make that clear. I guess I'll just hold it. Thank you, Tom. Again, I'm Tim Flask, the Acting Director of Public Works and Water Resources, and hopefully many of these projects that we discussed tonight are ongoing projects or programs in which you may have heard Tom or I discuss or bring contracts to council in previous years. Others are overdue rehabilitation or upgrades to facilities that provide our water and other services throughout the city. I will give you a high-level overview, but by all means, please feel free to reach out to me or anyone here tonight after the presentation, or by email if you have additional questions that don't get answered tonight. We have created a new email address, and it is asknewark@newark.de.us. Tom will bring it up later; it'll show on the screen. That's really for any question you may have about Newark. It's not specific to the referendum. We created it very recently, but if you send an email to that email address, it'll get to the right person, and we'll take care of any questions you may have. And I'll also note that part of the referendum discussions that we have created a few videos, some star myself. I'm better behind the camera, but sometimes they put me in front of the camera in order to do some camera work. So anyway, if you go to the city's YouTube channel, I believe, Megan, if I'm not mistaken, you can view those videos, and it gives you a little update on why some of these projects. And you get to see some of the projects and what they look like, and what you're actually what we're asking you to vote on. So I will begin. With I want to go in the order of which the questions are listed. So I want to start with the Rodney Regional Stormwater Park. You can see here we have a range of costs from $6.5 million to $9 million. We have been approved for $9 million in by the Water Infrastructure Advisory Council. That they saw merit in this project and approved us at the end of 2017 for a locked in at 2% rate. So hopefully many of you have heard or seen our proposal for purchasing the former Rodney dorms and demolishing them to make way for a stormwater management pond with park amenities. We believe this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the city to acquire a piece of land that is well situated to help achieve stormwater quality and water quantity improvements. This parcel sits at the top of a large drainage area where little to no stormwater controls exist today. Managing stormwater near its source is a key benefit to downstream systems. The parcel is also situated in an area that lacks city-owned open space in close proximity to our award-winning Main Street. And as you can see here on the slide, this information comes from our Parks Department, I believe, in conjunction with the state parks. and some of the counts that they perform. So approximately 6,000 residents live within a 15-minute walk of that property, and nearly 2/3 of our residents live within a 10-minute bike ride of the site. So that combination really, really speaks to us. So the combination, sorry, too far. The combination of the park and the pond would address these important issues, as well as serve as a showcase for our educational efforts to show residents and visitors how they can contribute to keeping stormwater and ultimately our drinking water clean and safe. It is important to point out that most people see flooding. They see, a catch basin over top or a road flooded that you can't drive through. What you don't see there is the water quality, the cleanliness of the water. Even though most of our stormwater runs off below our drinking water intake, it is above the drinking water intake for roughly 400,000 residents in Newcastle County through Suez Water, or used to be United Water Delaware. So the cleaner we can send the water in, the cleaner it stays, the easier it is for them to treat, and for our neighbors in Newcastle County to drink. So it's also important to note that the concept plan that I'm going to bring up here in just a minute for the pond and the park features was a product of an extensive public process that included input and suggestions from many residents, some that I see here in the audience today, in a year-long effort in 2017. We had several public meetings similar to this where we got ideas, and then we created the concept plans, and then we brought the concept plans back. And what you see here is the base for the concept that was recommended by the group. So Rodney, question one, which is the $6.5 million question, essentially would allow us to, as Tom discussed, purchase the property, remediate the site, demolish the buildings, and then build the pond, as well as some minor amenities and some ADA upgrades. If you're not familiar, which from the few folks I talked to before the meeting, many of you lived in Nottingham Green or Nottingham Manor. Dallam Road is a bicycle is a designated bikeway in which you can come down and take the path and go right under the underpass and right on into town, or vice versa. So our idea for the baseline here is to keep that open. Obviously, we want to have a nice pathway, and connectivity is very important for both transportation and for safety and park amenities. So the question 2 on Rodney, a yes vote on the question 2 would authorize council to borrow money from the state revolving loan fund along with the purchase of the property to fund the majority of the park amenities that were chosen as part of our public workshops in 2017. The residents that we discussed it with were in general agreement that passive recreation coupled with small classroom space and a picnic areas was the best fit for this area. An accessible fishing pier was included, but the pond we don't believe will be stocked. But like anywhere else, fish will show up through birds and perhaps household pets and things like that. But there would be fish at some point in the pond. Mosquitoes have always been brought up on this project, and we anticipate keeping the water moving through a series of aeration and different native plantings, which bring native birds, which eat mosquitoes and things like that. We have extensive plantings, as you can see here on the outside, and these are what you see around here. These are edge treatments. So the edge treatments, not only do they assist with the safety of the pond itself, but they also provide areas for these native birds and native insects and things like that to reside. So the educational signage and the outdoor classroom that we envision for the site is part of our stormwater program for the NPDS, which is a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, which you can see why we call it NPDS. And essentially that mandates from the federal level that we keep our water clean, and that we have educational facilities that show, folks, hey, this is why you need clean water. This is why you don't dump oil down your drain. This, a lot of different educational items. These would be boards and signs. These would actually be rain barrels, rain gardens, things that you can do on your own property in your own neighborhoods in open space. So this would basically, kind of be a test ground, so you can come and see how it should be done and how it works and how it would fit into your property. Again, some additional landscaping and obviously some sort of restroom, but it would likely be a portable restroom. We don't anticipate building a building. As Dave will discuss earlier, later, the funding for the park amenities through the revolving loan funds are locked at 2%, and the approval is awaiting our signature. We have the paperwork in hand. Funding these upgrades in future years with other sources of funding will likely cost more than the $2.5 million. And again, we do, if you see, we do have other documentation out there, and you may see a number of 8.2 million. We went with 9 million because we didn't want to come up short. If you authorize 9 million, we can spend up to 9 million if the project is approved that way. But if the project is approved, if we're only authorized to borrow 8 and the project comes in at 8.1, we cannot borrow more than is authorized. So with the low interest rate, we certainly didn't want to get caught short of our goal. So question 3 has to do with our water and sewer projects, also funded through the state revolving loan fund, which is in general, and Dave may have a little more information on this a little bit later, but in general, the state revolving loan fund is a federally seeded program that gives the state money for these water quality and surface water and groundwater projects. So the first project that you see on the board here is the Laird Tract well field restoration. That is actually a new project that was in the 2018 budget, but it has been in the process for quite some time. So essentially, the Laird Tract well field is a group of wells that are up in the White Clay Creek State Park area. They're not all within the park, but some of them are actually on some University of Delaware land, but they're all in protected wooded areas, either in conservation easements or within the protected White Clay Creek Valley. When they were these wells were actually furlowed when we brought the reservoir online. We used to use them and pump them directly into the system, but they all had taste, odor, taste and odor issues. That was not easily treatable at the time with the facilities that we have. So when the reservoir came online, we furlowed those wells and began to use the combination of the creek and the reservoir. Essentially, our plan here is to take these wells and pump them to the reservoir. It keeps the reservoir water fresh, and then we could use the water from the reservoir, and it would essentially double our drought resiliency. We would have very, very little issue if there were to be a drought. I mean, obviously we would still look at water restrictions and things based on the state recommendations, but we would be in pretty good shape should we have that roughly 2 million gallons a day extra capacity. So again, this is another acronym that I'm glad someone came up with. We call it SCADA, but it's Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System. That essentially allows us to be at 2 places at one time. We have we have 2 water treatment facilities, and we also have multiple wells and pumps and booster stations to monitor on a daily basis. We have one 24-hour, it's not the same person, but we have one 24-hour water treatment plant operator who is on board at all times. But with a 9 square mile city, it's not that much, but he can be 9 miles away from an emergency. We certainly can, with the SCADA system, there's an opportunity for Tom, myself, our water superintendent to get out our phones and shut things down, monitor progress, see how things are going, without having to physically be there when we can't. We were also able to track real-time levels in production and make changes to the production levels should we see fit. An example is say there's a fire and you have to hook up to a fire hydrant, and the fire hydrant, and they're pumping a lot of water. We can make changes to, turn pumps on, turn pumps off, and things of that nature. The South Wellfield treatment plant upgrades, that is one of the larger projects and one of the more important ones for us. Many of you may be aware, within 2017, early 2018, we were made aware that the EPA had listed the groundwater underneath of our South Wellfield treatment plant on the EPA's National Register, which many of you may know as the Superfund. That sounds very bad, but it's the same contamination that we've known has been in the groundwater for since the late 1990s. Luckily, the contaminants that are found in the water are easily treatable, and the treatment system is actually our well treatment plant. Unfortunately, the current system is nearing the end of its useful life, as Tom described earlier, and it needs to be replaced. It also needs a few modern upgrades and a sizing increase to be able to, number one, treat the amount of contamination that is coming out, and also to treat the amount of water that we have available to send through that treatment plant. So again, it would increase our ability to serve fresh, clean water to the city of Newark. Tom mentioned a lot about the water main replacements, and here we have about $4 million, and he mentioned the system-wide study, which is certainly in process, but we do believe, or we know, that we have enough information and data to target and fix the worst of what we know within this 5-year cycle. So there are a few, and actually I'm not sure how far this district goes out. Does it go out to West Main? So the West Main tank, there's some pipes along there, and then in Wilson Road, there's some areas there that we know that we plan to replace at the next in the next budget cycle. So the water tank rehabilitation, many of you see our towers. There's one at Levier's, there's one out at Windy Hills, and then one West Main and on Dallam Road. They're kind of hidden there in the trees, but they're there and they're doing their job. Unfortunately, they have most of the tanks that we have not rehabilitated lately all have lead-based coatings on them, which makes them more difficult to rehabilitate. It is important to mention that the lead is on the outside, not on the inside. So the inside is okay. So while the state is beginning to draft legislation on methods of removal of the lead paint, we're actually exploring options to remove and replace the tanks rather than deal with the dry blasting in proximity to the residents in the city. If we do go the dry blasting route, we'll have our own specifications drafted to reflect the state's regulations, and perhaps even tighter than the state regulations. So the sewer project also included in question 3 is more of one project, but it takes many, encompasses many steps. The first step is actually to identify the critical lines and perform inspections using closed circuit television. I mentioned the YouTube channel. One just went on today. It'll give you a little more detail about those. And I asked Megan to put the cockroach picture in, and I don't think she followed through with it. But there are some cockroaches in the sewer, but they usually stay there. So, and they get very scared when the closed circuit television comes through. So the CCTV inspections are then reviewed, and the defects in the pipes are prioritized in a report which we utilize to group the projects that are identified for similar rehabilitation methods. This has a condition assessment report, but basically the report looks like that, and it'll have color codes and then a chart for what type of rehabilitation method, be it dig and replace, a point repair, which is just a small hole when you go down and fix a little bit of a pipe, or we actually line most of our sewer lines because they're made out of clay and they separate, and then you get roots and things and water that comes in, and all we do is, well, I make it sound easy, but it's really not. They shoot a pipe in, expand it, and then basically that cures in place and becomes the new pipe. Because you actually gain capacity within the pipe because you're making the pipe much more smooth inside rather than have the divot every time you hit a 4-foot section. So you make it a little more, and you take care of any imperfections within the pipe. Again, we have identified roughly $4 million worth of repairs after inspecting about 15% of the system. We do inspect some of the worst parts of the system first, so we know that it may not be linear the way we're looking at it, but we don't anticipate that dropping a whole lot once we do the rest of the system, especially as they continue to get older. As Tom mentioned, a lot of the city was built within a short period of time with some annexations and things in post World War II and then in the 70s and 80s. And it should be noted that we've completed close to $1 million of these repairs in the past few years, including about $250,000 in a contract that is about halfway done now. That's a lining. If you tried to go to McDonald's last week, they were doing a part there on McKees Lane. So all around the city, we try to keep up on our weekly reports and things that have, tell you where we are doing work around the city. So number one, you can either avoid it or you can go see it if you really want to go see it. So, and question 4 is the general obligation bond, or the general fund projects that we hope to fund with the part of the referendum. Many of you will notice the domes, or the red marks in the red concrete slabs in the sidewalks. That's part of our ADA transition plan, which is again a federally mandated program that we have. I believe it began in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. So we're about 10 years in, and we believe we have about 10 years left. And I tend to joke that as soon as we get them all updated, the feds will come out with something new and we'll have to start all over again. So I believe we have about 400 ramps left to do, be it repair the ramps or put in a new ramp where one does not exist. And we do about 40 a year, so we're about 10 years out. Excuse me. The hard surface improvements, our award-winning park system, needs repairs made to its, as much as we like to have, natural areas, we still need areas to park. We like, paved paths and things like that, and the athletic courts. So in order to complete some of these projects, we have about $1.1 million that actually we try to reduce the costs on that by lumping that in with our paving contract for roads and streets. So we do get pretty good pricing on that, and it's able to bring that cost down. Some of the other small ones are just repairs that seem to get kicked down the line every year. Like Tom said, there's a big project that comes in and we just can't complete some of these smaller ones. So that's why the master plan for the field operations complex, the first part of that was to build a new salt shed that allowed us to store 1 year's worth of salt, and then essentially we don't have to fight DelDOT and other towns and municipalities at the barge to get a load of salt. We tend to have enough for at least a year's worth. Again, Tom mentioned the parking lots downtown. They do bring in revenue, and that revenue is used for other general fund services. So those lots need maintenance, just like any parking lot or driveway. And again, the road repaving projects, it's a smaller amount. We do get money from the bond bill, and we get some money get a good portion of money from the state based on our percentage of roads that we take care of. And that the total for all these projects is about $3 million. So I appreciate you sticking with me, and I promise that was almost on script, just a little bit off. But with that, I'll turn it over to Dave Del Grande. He's going to stay on script except for one joke. And if you have any questions afterwards, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Dave Del Grande, the Finance Director, and thanks for sticking with us. I only have 50 more slides to go. Really, it's 51, sorry. So debt, why debt? Why are we doing this and borrowing the money? So as Tom mentioned, the city has historically used cash to fund the majority of our capital needs. Debt financing accomplishes two main goals, and one is it fairly allocates the cost of a project over its useful life. It allows everyone to pay their fair share of the cost of the project over the period the asset is in use. And the other is long-term debt has a minimal impact on the annual budget, thereby keeping the city's annual revenue requirements as low as possible. Low needs for revenue translates directly into lower utility and tax rates and fees that the city must charge for the services that we provide to you all. So we have three funding options, and there's the state revolving loan, the bond financing, and then lastly a bank loan. Starting with the state revolving loan, it's the most advantageous method to finance all of our water-related projects, and 90% of what we're asking for in this referendum is we're looking to fund through the state revolving loan program. Due to their federal support, the state is able to offer low-interest loans on a competitive basis to all government agencies within the state of Delaware. The low interest and closing costs associated with these loans make them very attractive, especially when the rates in the bond market begin to rise. Annually, the federal government gives about $40 million to the state, which they then allocate into water, sewer, stormwater programs, which then translate into competitive applications from all the agencies for us to compete for that money. And it's thereby keeps the interest rates and the borrowing extremely low. Another advantage to the program is that it provides flexibility with interest-only loans during the construction phase in order to provide budget relief to the agencies benefiting from the program. Our involvement in the state revolving loan program will also make us eligible in the future for grants for our water, sewer, and stormwater projects that we previously did not have access to. So ultimately, there's been discussions on the interest that we'll be paying on this money that we'll be borrowing, which is probably in about in a $10 million range over the life of the payback period. So the one great part is that money goes right back to the state, which then turn around can come back to us through grants, which I'll get into in a minute. So if all of our water-related programs are not approved for a state revolving loan, our fallback plan would be to go to the bond market or with a bank loan. The bond market route is the most costly, but provides a lower interest rate than a traditional bank loan. Even with higher fees, a bond authorization is generally the least expensive once we factor in the interest rates when compared to a bank loan. Bond funding becomes more attractive when we begin borrowing amounts over $10 million, since the fees associated with the bond funding remain relatively fixed regardless of the amount that is being borrowed. The city currently benefits from a bond rating of AA+ from Fitch Ratings and AA2 from Moody's Investor Services, and we would need to be reaffirmed by the rating agencies if we were to go out to the bond market for new authorization. Lastly, a bank loan is a viable option for the city to consider. Although they carry a higher interest rate than the bonds, they don't have high fees to go along with them. Fees for our proposed bond could be $100,000 less by going with a bank loan. Lower fees when borrowing smaller amounts of money make loans more advantageous to pursue than a full bond offering. If the referendum were to pass, a bank loan would be considered as a funding source. So up on the wall here is our current outstanding loan obligation, and it's around $15 million what we owe to date. The green bar represents the debt service being paid back on the reservoir and the South Wellfield project. $1.3 million of our annual debt service payments through year 2022 account for the reservoir. The next largest piece of our annual $2.7 million debt service bill represents the automated meter infrastructure project, or as we all know, the smart meters. The blue bar in this chart represents payment of $1.1 million annually through 2022, when a part of the lease is paid in full, and then the remaining balance of $753,000 continues through 2028. The other items, which are tiny little red bars at the bottom, consist of other small projects like parking equipment and the fiber project for our city-owned assets, and energy efficiency projects for city buildings. This slide reflects the projects that are included in the state revolving fund program. The state has already approved, as we mentioned, the project of $9 million for Rodney, pending a successful referendum and a special at a rate of 2%. And just one thing worth mentioning is the state does not generally pre-approve projects at their level through the state revolving loan program, mainly because if the referendum didn't pass, they would have money sitting there that's been authorized but no able to pass it out. So they had quite a conversation at their board meeting regarding whether or not to approve this or not approve this in advance of a referendum. And I'm quite happy to say that it did pass, which is great for us because the state saw the value in this project. So it was good to see. And also with a 2% rate, it's less money for us to pay back. The remaining, outside of Rodney, the remaining sewer and water projects total $15,625,000, and all require approval in order to be considered in the state program. This table just shows the earmark projects for our bond funding, as we showed. And if we were to go through with, if we were approved for every project on the water, sewer, stormwater side, our more likely chance would be to go to a bank loan versus going to the bond market for $3 million. Ultimately, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, when we went to the bond market in 2011 for the refinancing of the reservoir, we spent about $110,000 on all the closing costs related to that. If we were to do that today, the closing costs generally stay fixed, and spending $110,000 to borrow $3 million isn't the best way to go, even factoring in a better interest rate. So the proposed referendum helps us allocate the financial obligation across the next 20+ years to share costs equitably and fairly. Our current debt service of $2.7 million would increase to about $3.5 million in 2022, and then it'll drop as we get into the out years. Any annual debt service amount over the current $2.7 million that we built into our budget would require us to find the revenue needed to fund the additional payment. Past couple of years, about 90 cents on every capital dollar spent came from cash or current revenue with the city. Our goal is to diversify the spending plan to a combination of cash and debt payments in order to get the projects we need completed, and to spread that cost of these projects out across their useful lives. So the green bars you see is what we're doing now with our current obligations, and we will be layering on Rodney, the orange, questions 1 and 2, the water and sewer projects 3, and then finally the general fund projects, which is question number 4. So if we paid strictly cash for these $26.7 million of projects between now and 2022, our cash requirements increase substantially over the next 4 years, and then they taper back off again when we get past 2023. The projects get completed, but raising such a large amount of cash in a short period would be a challenge if we were to continue as they exist right now. Cash requirements would increase from 2.7 to 5.3 in 18, then increase to 12.5 in 19, and then it steps back down to 9, then 5, 6, and 7, and so forth. And it becomes a bumpy ride that doesn't work well for us when it comes to budgeting purposes, and also your pocketbooks. So, what are the great benefits of the state revolving program? And one of those is grants and more grants and advanced planning grants, which grants are a great thing. Not only do we get the low interest rate of 2% to 3.5% or so, as we're paying our loan back, that interest income goes into a kitty ultimately held by the state, and then we then qualify to apply for other grants for things we would be doing anyway, more than likely. So there's wastewater, surface water, drinking water, planning advances. We would be eligible for up to $300,000 for each with the design and engineering reports for sewer, water, and stormwater projects. And half of that would be forgiven once certain levels of completion were met. So ultimately, we could be potentially getting back more in grants and advanced planning grants than we would be in the interest that we're paying in some years. The Asset Management Incentive Program, Tim touched on earlier, we need, by having a logged, recorded record of our assets, that helps us plan to what we need to do in the future. So when the earlier chart showing when we need to replace things and why in the next 50 years or so, our asset management system helps us determine that. So in order to build those up for our sewer programs and stormwater and continue with water, we would have a pool of money that we could tap into from the state that would help fund for those expenses. There's wastewater facility planning matching grants and doing feasibility studies for future sewer projects with 50% cash matches. All things that we wouldn't have opportunities to touch if we weren't in the state revolving loan program. Community water quality improvement grants, drinking water grants, surface water grants. So the G word is a great thing in any finance director's planning toolbox. The best part, I think, is the ability to assist our low-income population. We'd also be eligible for up to $200,000 a year in assistance for water and sewer, so a combined of $400,000 a year, up to $200 per account for water and $200 for sewer, based on certain income and asset thresholds, which are based on HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development programs. So as we get into future utility models for our rates for sewer and water, we will be able to help the low-income faction of the city with some assistance through these grant programs. So what if? And assuming nothing were to change regarding the fees to come up with debt, these debt payments or the cash requirements if we paid with cash, what would happen here? So the top box represents the city paying cash for everything mentioned. Due to the cash requirements each year, rates would fluctuate greatly until the projects were completed. Large increases would be followed by large reductions in subsequent years. The net overall impact would be a 12.7% increase for the average city resident in 2019 when you roll in water, sewer, stormwater, electric, and property tax. The bottom box, with the use of debt financing, the city is able to show modest increases in rates as if they're even necessary to cover the costs of the estimated debt service payments. In the debt scenario, stormwater increases the greatest in 2019, which equates to just over $1 for the residential homeowner. All the rates see increases between 1 and 2.6% between 19 and 22. So looking at the top, you can see it's a 12.7 total out of your pocket expense using cash that we'd have to raise to accumulate for these projects. Then a small 2% increase in 20, and then the rates hypothetically would drop in 21, then again in 22. Going down at the bottom, because we're spreading out the cost over a time period, I'm only showing the first 5 years here, but ultimately going out to 2043 or so forth, it would be roughly in the less than the 1% range. So 1%, 0.4, 0.5, and 0.8%. So dollars, what does that mean to me? Again, going above at the top, the average Newark resident today is spending about $276 per month on water, sewer, stormwater, electric tax bills. In 2019, that would go to, there would be about a $35 a month increase using the cash model. Another increase of $6 in 20, and then we would drop down $23, drop down $18 in 21 and 22 to get ourselves back down to the 18 levels that we are. And these scenarios are just showing, just based on the kind of borrowing that we're looking at, not talking about anything else related to our budget. Moving down to the debt financing piece, you're looking at a monthly increase of $2.70 in 19, of which $1 of that is the Rodney project when it's all in. Then you're looking at another $1 increase in 20, and 21, $1.46, $2.33 in 2022. So a little more steady, a little more even than you would see in using the cash model. And also the bottom piece does not include any potential grants that we'd be potentially eligible for to help offset some of those expenses, pay back with the interest. And also all the debt that we're talking about this evening, interest expenses can be controlled with advanced payment on the debt that we're incurring. So ultimately, we have until 20 years to pay these things off, but there's no penalty if we decide to pay them off sooner, if we have any potential huge windfall coming down the pike from STAR or anything else for that matter.
So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out, and we'll open up to a question and answer session if anybody's got any questions. Let's start over here.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for your presentation. It was very informative and very well prepared. Just a question on the Rodney stormwater. The cost is $6.5 million. Have you assessed what the benefit cost would be to the stormwater system and to any other infrastructure repairs you have to make associated with that area?
Yeah, so the way that the Rodney project helps us is if let me see if I can find a map. So we'll come over to the water main map here. So the Rodney site. Okay, yeah, great. The Rodney site is located at toward the top of a relatively large drainage area. Yeah. So Rodney's here. Here's South Main, Elkton Road, Main Street. So all the water from this area, this neighborhood, it's about 70-ish acres if you include the site itself, funnels through the underpass, basically. There's 2 pipes there. And then runs down through Old Newark, through the Star campus, and eventually into Silverbrook. And then there's a large area over here in Devon, the bins, that flows into that same stormwater system. The majority of the flooding that we're seeing, so we see some pretty bad flooding here at the underpass itself. I've been with the city since 2011. We've had to close South Main Street at least 3 times since I've been here because of flooding. And then we also see pretty significant flooding over in Devon in the bins. The story I like to tell, we had a guy come into our office and claimed that the water was up to the side view mirror on his pickup during one of our summer thunderstorms. And Tim and I didn't believe him. Like, yeah, everybody's, it's like a fish story. So the next day he brought in a picture of the water up to the side view mirror of his pickup truck. So the flooding here, especially on some individual streets, it's pretty severe. So the benefit that this provides us is by holding the water back at the top of the system, it frees up capacity in the stormwater system downstream so that these pipes can drain into it better. Additionally, if let's say we were to just upgrade pipes in here and put in bigger pipes, the Silverbrook neighborhood floods. So we'd take the flooding from here and just move it down there and flood these people out worse. So what we can do is we can hold back drainage here. We can increase the amount of water that we get off of here without making things worse further down. So we did look at some alternatives. So what would it cost to do this some other way if we didn't buy Rodney? Really the only way that we'd be able to address the flooding here without making things worse here is by purchasing land somewhere else. So we looked at trying to do Phillips Park, but we can't get the vertical elevations to work. There's just not enough fall from Dallas to the railroad. You can only get about a foot or 2 of water, and it just doesn't work. So then we'd have to look at buying houses probably in Devon, the bins itself, or Old Newark, and it'd be, I think, $9 million or more just to buy the land. Even more if you wanted to do eminent domain and get it done in the next 20 years or so, because we'd have to wait for properties to come up for sale and buy them or try and pay people out to leave. And that's just not a great way to do it. Then we'd still have to pay for the pipes and things to actually make the improvement. So we think it's definitely going to be more cost effective. It's taking land that is not neighborhood now. We're not displacing people or putting it right in somebody's backyard. So we think it's definitely going to be the most cost effective.
Does the Rodney project eliminate the flooding in those 2 southern areas or just lessen it?
So it will. The project is being designed for the 10-year storm. So something with flooding is you design to a recurrence interval. So how often do you anticipate seeing flooding? So with rivers and things, we use the 100-year storm or 100-year flood is what you design around. For stormwater systems, usually it's the 10 or the 25-year rainfall is what you focus on. So the Rodney Pond's being designed for the 10-year. Directly, it will directly eliminate the flooding right at the underpass for up to the 10-year storm. It will definitely make a direct improvement on the Old Newark area. The improvements over here, we will need to get into modeling some more. It might take some additional pipe changes over here to really see the full benefit here, but those pipe changes will be possible, whereas right now they're not.
So, and also one advantage to this parcel is it's dramatically undervalued for what we're paying for it versus what the retail market's calling for. We're looking at about $1 million an acre around Main Street area, and we're looking at 7 acres here.
It was $5 million an acre on Main Street.
Wow, it just got better.
So
Ultimately, with the $2.1 million land purchase price from UD, we're also, with that comes about $700,000 in brownfield funds from the state to bring that cost to 1.4. So for us to acquire 7 acres in this location that it's at, it's literally the perfect storm. I mean, Tom and Tim still talk about how they ran down the halls when the date they found out this parcel was available for sale. So it's truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the city to resolve a stormwater issue that we're having for, I want to say as little money as it's costing. It's not little, but for the price that it will cost?
Yes, so the way our contract is, Dave almost got it right. It's $2.1 million for the land, and then the university has agreed to further discount that up to $700,000 of demolition and remediation costs that's not covered by the brownfield program. So if the brownfield program reimburses us, $500,000, and the demolition is $1.5 million, we'll have $1 million left over, and UD will credit us $700,000 of that. So we still paid $300,000 for the demo. But so basically, it's going to cost more than that. So we'll get the full $700,000 reduction in cost. So realistically, $1.4 million for this. We have on pretty good information that the Dickinson piece is under contract for around $9 or more million. So it's only about an acre larger for Dickinson, so UD really played ball with us well and gave us a very good price on that property.
Just one quick question.
Yeah.
What's the cost to purchase it minus all the discount?
So the cost to purchase minus the discount is $1.4 million.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, assuming that the demolition cost comes back where we expect.
Right.
So most of the Rodney buildings are masonry construction, so it's just block. So doesn't have a whole lot of value on when the university demolished Chrysler, I think they actually made money selling the steel. We're not in that same situation, unfortunately. So yes, Dr. Morgan.
Yeah, so this is the water distribution system. And I think that it shows that most of the red pipe where you're concerned about being beyond a lifetime is in the area of Main Street and the area surrounding the University of Delaware's campus.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the University of Delaware needs to have reliable water supplies.
Yes.
Function, right? And has any thought been given to encouraging the university to, maybe increase its subvention, not so much for police services and all that, but just bringing the water supply?
All right, so I'll repeat the question because I didn't hand you the mic, and I want to make sure it gets picked up on the recording. I forgot to do that earlier. So the question was, have we asked the university to basically pitch in through some sort of subvention to support the water system and the pipes near their campus? So I kind of touched on this during the water main discussion. Some of these pipes that are red really are probably in better shape than a lot of the other ones, just because how old they are. They were built really thick. I think we actually have a piece of the Main Street pipe back there, and you'll see it's like an inch thick. And then we've got a piece of a more modern pipe, and it's like maybe 3/8 of an inch thick, definitely less than a half an inch thick. So even though it's old, it probably has more life than these pipes per se. So it's 15, 20 years out. So the downtown system isn't necessarily as bad as it looks, but it is all pretty old. Now, I can say as recently as today, we've been talking with UD about subvention and reviewing how much they give us. So if you don't know what subvention is, it's basically a payment in lieu of taxes. So the university gives us a certain amount of money each year to make up for a portion of the fact that they don't pay property taxes.
That's voluntary.
It's voluntary, yeah, exactly. So it doesn't cover how much they would have had to have paid if they paid taxes, but at least it's something. So we've been, what's that? Okay, so we have been talking with them, or like I said, the conversation as recent as today about that. I haven't spoken with them directly about the water system necessarily. With our water systems, they're our largest water customer, so they pay the same rates that you pay for water. So they're getting a large benefit, but they're getting a large bill along with it. So unlike the taxes where they're not paying taxes, so there's less of I think a nexus to having them pay something in lieu of because they're actually paying it.
Just one thing to add, Tom mentioned earlier that most of our infrastructure was put in by either a developer, federal government, things like that. Any developer that comes into town, including the University of Delaware, if they want to build something new that we don't have capacity to serve, they're on the hook for making the upgrades so that we have capacity to serve, and then they turn those assets over to us. Most recently, the university built their new dorms on South Academy Residence Hall, and our sewer system could not handle that. So they paid
$250,000
about $250,000 for both study design and physical repairs in the field to make sure that the capacity existed.
And they paved the road.
And they paved the road in front of that. That was all their cost. you don't want a brand new building and an ugly road, so they paid for that.
Yeah. All right. So I know one question that's come up at most of these is what happens if the Rodney referendum doesn't fail? What happens to the Rodney parcel? So if the referendum fails and we as a council, with council rather, can, under our current contract, there's a method that we can buy it over time. The interest rate's essentially 5%, and it's a $500,000 payment each year. So we could purchase the property with cash over the next few years and probably absorb it into the budget, maybe a minor increase and pay for that. It wouldn't cover costs of demolition or building the park or the pond or anything like that, but we would at least acquire the property. Alternately, if that doesn't work, it would be pretty tough to get our hands on it. The fate of the property if we don't buy it. So the zoning is currently UN zoning, which is university. So I'm not sure if you know this or not, but the university is exempt from zoning. We made some changes to the slideshow now that the questions are finalized, and I guess I deleted a slide by accident. One of the things I wanted to talk about was, the university is proposing, I don't know if you know this or not, but to bring up to 5,500 new students over the next 10 years. So 4,000 graduate students and 1,500 undergraduate students. Now, the undergraduate students, I hear the sigh, but graduate students are actually what we hear a lot of the time is what people want to have in the city. They're young professionals. They generally don't have kids, so they're not putting a strain on the school system. They live here year-round, so they're supporting our business year-round. Probably not getting into much trouble because they've got to study. So the 4,000 grad students I see as a real asset to the city when they come. And going back to that red map, if we can build them housing where they can live near campus as opposed to out in Bear or the surrounding communities and drive in, we can make them somewhere where they can live downtown. We can get that tax revenue, the utility sales, and they can walk or bike to class instead of driving in and clogging our streets. Now I lost my train of thought on the original question. What was the?
You were talking about university zoning.
Yes, yeah, UN zoning. So the university is exempt from zoning. So when those students come, if we don't build housing for them, they're either going to live somewhere else and drive in, or eventually the university is going to say, hey, we're going to build housing. They'll build housing. They can build it wherever they want, as tall as they want, whatever shape they want. We won't get tax revenue from it. We will get utility sales. But, there's a reason the towers are the only buildings you see like that, because they're not allowed in zoning, because the university can build whatever they want. So anything that's UN zoned is university zoned. They can do what they want with it. When it changes hands to a private property owner, back in the 70s, our council took the time to actually place an underlying zoning under the UN. So if they ever sold something off, it would have a zoning and they would have controlled what the zoning is, and the purchaser of that property wouldn't ask for some super high density because it's unzoned. So the underlying zoning generally matches what's on top of it. So it's RM zoning, which is garden apartments. It's 16 units per acre. So on that site, you could fit around 110 units. So chances are, I think we'd be looking at student housing, someone coming in trying to build student housing. Whether it be graduate housing, undergraduate housing, hard to say. Probably some student housing based on everything else that comes in the downtown area. But that would be generally by right, except that I think they need a special use permit for apartments. So there is a little discretion on council's part to approve something like that. But that's what I see as the general options. Either we buy it via the referendum, we buy it over time using cash afterwards, and then try and find the money over time to build the park, or we don't buy it and someone else buys it and does something there. So.
Can I add one thing?
Yep.
We are certified as a brownfield developer, and there's a brownfield development agreement associated with this property. If you take the time to read it, it's riveting, I promise. I tried to pass it off on the solicitor read, but he passed it back. But anyway, there is a stipulation that it not be used for residential based on the way that we plan to use it. But it could easily be changed if it were in someone else's hands. They would just change the remediation that's necessary to do that. So currently it says that it's limited to commercial, industrial, and recreational uses, but that could change. I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah, good point. Joe.
Just as,
Okay.
you can, I think if, either way, I think the city really needs to get control of that property. And one thing you could think about, not poo-pooing grad students, but perhaps the city proactively rezoning it to RA, because we do have a lack of over 55 housing, and I think that would be a great place for over 55 housing. It's close to downtown.
No, I agree. That's another thing that we hear a lot of, young professionals and 55 and over housing are two, I would say, the two things we hear the most that we need more of, especially downtown walkable is key. That's a great location, especially with the underpass. Yes?
So what's happening with the Dickinson parcel?
So the Dickinson parcel, the university has, they put out a request for proposals. They received quite a few proposals. I've spoken with the group that came in second, and they said their bid was $8 million. And the RFP had a stipulation where if you were within 10%, they would have taken everybody within 10% of the highest bidder and done kind of a second round. They did not get an opportunity to do a second round, so we know it was 8.81 million or more. So they've been working with a developer. They still haven't announced who or what they're planning to do, but it'll be developed into something.
But they can do whatever they want, is what you're saying?
No, it'll revert to the RM zoning. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So since the university's not building it,
Okay,
they don't get to take advantage of that RM zoning.
got it,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes.
Can we go back to slides, I don't know if it was 54 or 55, but
Yeah.
discuss the cost, whether we did this on, I guess, on a cash basis
Yeah.
or not. I was trying to understand, I guess I didn't understand exactly what some of this was. For
Okay.
example, if you go to 2018, the total at the bottom is 276.29. I wasn't exactly sure what that represented.
So that is the average monthly bill for an average, if you're average water customer, sewer customer, electric customer, average in every single category, your monthly bill is
So that's
$276.29.
taxes, electric.
Yep,
Yes.
all of them added up. Yep, so you can see your monthly bill would go up $35 a month the first year, and then go up another $6 a month the second year, then it dropped down $23 a month the next year, and down $18 a month the next year. So one thing Dave was mentioning earlier is equitability. So let's say you live in Newark in 2019 and 2020, and then you move away in 2021. Well, you got to pay for everything, and none of it was done before you left. And then the next person that moves here, they're not paying for anything, and they get all the benefit of what you paid for. So by going with debt for those projects, the people that are living here, way out here, using the parks and new water treatment plants, are going to pay a portion of that, whereas under the existing model, they don't. Now, one thing to mention, can you go back to the slides that show the graphs? Sorry. Other way, yep. Keep going, right here. So one question that we get a lot is, what happens here after you finish these 5 projects? So the projects that are up here on the referendum, that is not our entire capital program. So there's nothing from electric in here. There's a lot of our smaller projects that have a shorter life that aren't in here. And there are a handful of other projects that we just didn't put in here, like our street paving program and things like that. So we're still gonna have to pay cash for them. And we're not saying that we should use debt for everything. Ultimately, our goal is to get to a place where we're using debt for those projects that come around every 10, 15 years that are really big, to kind of take those bumps, the lumpiness out of the amount of revenue we need to pay for our capital programs. Right now, we have basically no cash left. So we have a reserve policy, so it looks like we have $24 million of cash in reserves, but almost all of that's encumbered towards something. So it's either an operating reserve that we need to be able to pay the bills and pay our employees and things while payments are coming in, or it's allocated against a capital project that's in an out year and it's sitting in a bucket, or it's encumbered already against an existing project that's under construction. In the water utility, for example, we have basically no cash that's not associated with a specific project. So what we see over the next 5 years is trying to use some of the cash that we're saving to build up our reserves, build up that rainy day fund, get it back into our projects. Hopefully, over the next few years, we'll look at, well, hopefully this fall, we'll be looking at making some adjustments to our utility rate structure. So like I mentioned earlier, our rates are all consumption-based. So if you use 0 gallons of water, if you leave town for a month, you'll get a bill of $0. Well, if your house caught on fire while you're gone, if you have a sprinkler system, it would still work. The fire company could still hook up, put the fire out. That pipe's still sitting out in front of your house. We're still mailing you a bill. All those things still have to happen whether you use water or not. So what we'll be looking to do is create a customer charge at some minimum amount and then lower the rate per gallon to balance that out. So the change in theory would be revenue neutral. We'd shift some of it from consumption into a fixed charge to take some of the variability out of our rates with the weather. So like I mentioned, that cost us $3 million over the last 3 years between water and sewer alone. So we can start to address that issue. We can build up our reserves, and we can do a real thorough analysis, continue working on our analysis of our condition. So when I guess I became director of Public Works and Water Resources in 2014. In 2014, all our maps were still hand-drawn on Mylar, which is a type of plastic or paper, and they're all over the wall. And that's how, you turned a valve, you counted the turns, you wrote it on the paper. And that's how our records were. So since 2014 to now, we've transferred everything over to digital. We did it all with grants. Grants are matching funding that we put towards grants, $500,000 or more in grant funding. We've got all our stuff in GIS, digital mapping. We've got a model of our water system, a model of our sewer system. We've done all this condition assessment work in essentially 3.5 years. So we've been really going at it. So we see over the next 5 years, fine-tuning our analysis, getting more information, and being able to really home in on where we need to do work and fine-tune that analysis. So maybe we can spread out that big wave coming, get more details, figure out which ones are actually okay and which ones are not. Now, I don't see any chance, if you can go back to the kind of the table or the chart version of the water mains. Get down, sorry. Now, realistically, I don't see any way that we're actually going to be able to deal with this in the near term without things getting worse than they are today. I think they will get slightly worse before they get better, but that 38, maybe a few of them slide up and maybe some of them are able to slide down, and we're able to smooth it out and get somewhere where we're stretching that work out over some more time. And then realistically, once we get out to year 6, so 2024, we'll probably realistically have another referendum. To that time, we'll have these big one-off projects out of the way. Here, I'll do it to speed this up a little bit. And be able to start working on our water mains a lot more intensively, focusing on them. So realistically, once we get out here to 5 years, so 2023, that's when we're finishing those projects. We'll probably be looking at layering on a little more debt then. We don't know how much yet. It depends on a lot of things. So it depends on how fast things build out on Star Campus, how well we're able to stabilize our revenue sources, how fast healthcare costs go up, union contracts, things like that. There are a lot of unknowns that we don't know now how things are going to play out over the next 5 years. But one thing I can say pretty confidently is realistically, we're not going to be able to do that with cash. So we'll probably have some borrowing. So as you move out through the years, eventually we're going to be realistically layering on some more debt as we move through. We just don't know how much yet. Now, if we were to try and do it with cash, we'd be looking at somewhat of a similar situation. So, these are this 5 years projects, and then you'd have another set over here, and then you have another set over there. So there's no free ride. So if we do it one way or the other, we're going to be paying it. We can either do it where we try and keep it nice and smooth, and we're spreading it out further, or we can deal with the ups and downs of trying to do things cash in the short term.
Right, so if I can add go back to the other side. On a budgetary purpose, our debt service is just over about 3% of our annual revenue. So if we were to stay between 3 and 4% a year of that being a benchmark for us to stay, we would be looking at about $3 million a year in debt service. So the green is around 2.7. So I envision going out into the out years just more of an opportunity. As long as our debt service, we know what that is going to be year over year over year, we can easily build that into our annual budget, and then it helps us with our planning for the future years, and then helps us queue up all these water sewer projects and stormwater that are important coming down the pike. So I'm looking at this chart as being a way for us to help our planning out going out 10, 15, 20 years. So as Tom said, when we're looking at referendums, they're not frequent. They're more happening on a one-of or as-needed type basis.
Yes, John?
Yeah, so my question about this chart is when it refers to debt service, is this principal and interest together, or
Yeah.
is it just interest?
Principal and interest, so it's the full payments. And, you know, the interest on the Rodney loan is 2%, which is the Fed's target inflation rate.
Yeah.
So if we hit their target inflation rate, it effectively costs us nothing in interest. So, you know, we're getting a project built in today's dollars, and we're paying it back with tomorrow's dollars that are worth a lot less.
Yeah.
So we haven't hit that inflation target in a long time, probably the last decade, but it's usually 1 to 1.5%. So a lot of that interest expense evaporates in inflation. So.
Yeah. Plus, we're getting grant back.
Yeah.
So we're
Yeah, plus we might get half of it back straight away in an asset management grant, and then the low-income subsidization grants and various other things. So it really is the state revolving loan fund program. Every time I talk with the guy, I learn something new in some other program I didn't know about.
a bank couldn't do this.
Yeah.
They'd be out of business. And the best thing, no, the worst thing is if we don't take advantage of this, someone else will. The funds are there at the state for us to get in line for and to apply for, which we have already. And if we don't accept the offer that the state is giving us, then they're just going to give it to the next person in line.
Yeah.
I would much rather see Newark residences and businesses today taking advantage of 2 and 3% loans versus it going to Kent and Sussex County or some other projects that are going on.
Yeah, and he's exactly right. So the way the SRF program works is they get a capitalization grant from the EPA, and it's about $10 million a year for water and $10 million a year for sewer and stormwater. And of that, they're required to give away a certain amount through subsidization to utilities, municipalities. So if no one puts in an application except one person, well, guess what? You got it. So if we don't get in that queue, and I think we have a very competitive case to get some of these grants, they'll just give them to someone else, and they'll just keep lowering the bar until they give them away.
We came in second place for a 0% loan
Yeah.
for Rodney.
Yeah.
We lost to Sussex. Was it Sussex project, right?
Yeah. So another great program in the State Revolving Loan Fund that didn't get brought up today is, so if you do a wastewater program of let's say $10 million, they'll give you a grant for a stormwater project. I can't remember the percentage, but it might be as high as 10% of the project cost. And they'll basically change your interest rate and roll it into the loan, so you end up paying back the same amount over the term of the loan. So they'll lower the interest rate, give you more money, and you pay back the same, say $15 million over the loan. So it's essentially a free project. So was it Rehoboth did the Ocean Outfall project? It was like $30 million. They made the mistake of getting, through their referendum, authorized to borrow basically the project cost. So then that extra grant is additional debt. So since they didn't get authorized for that additional debt, they couldn't use it. So they just put up a thing, hey, who wants in? So we submitted for Rodney, and I think it was $5 or $6 million of 0% interest that we would have gotten if we had gotten it. Unfortunately, it went to land preservation in Sussex County, I think. So
just a couple of years ago, the city of Wilmington took out a $36 million loan for the Wilmington treatment plant, which all our sewage goes to. It was a $36 million loan, 20 years at 3%. Well, Wilmington needed another $4 million a year later for another project, so they reworked the loan to $40 million, lowered the interest rate to 2%, and kept their debt schedule the same. So ultimately, they got an extra $4 million out of what they were borrowing for free. Yeah. So, like I said, if they were a bank, they wouldn't be in business today. But since they're here for us and it's coming with federal money, I'd much rather see us take advantage of these circumstances and these opportunities as what it truly is, than to have that go away to another agency down south.
And from your perspective, we need to get in the game.
Right.
Yeah.
Honestly, I spent some time at the county in my previous life, and DENREC would come knocking on our door on a regular basis, begging us to take the money, because at one point the bond market was a little bit better than the state revolving loan program. Now it's starting to flip a little bit. So we're right on the front end of that, and I'd really like to get us involved soon, because I see the opportunity starting to fade a little bit as more and more agencies are starting to understand and realize what type of great product it is that the state's offering. Newcastle County just had a $10 million project approved for the Christiana Force Main, which is a huge, basically that's the main line going from, for the treatment plant going from the county up into the city of Wilmington, which all of our stuff goes through.
To give you an idea of how big it is, the $10 million is just the cost to build the bypass to make the actual repair. So it is I think it's an 84-inch force main. So.
Yeah, so it's a huge project, and they're larger as governments are coming up with more and more issues that are water related. I'm worried about the well running dry at some point at the state level. So,
yeah. One thing we didn't mention: all the state revolving loan fund loans are competitive. Mm-hmm. So we go in and we fight with everybody else. Again, unfortunately, recently at least, they haven't been using all the money every year, so the pot kept building. Yeah. But all it takes is a big ocean outfall or Christina Force Main to just like us here, suck all the air out of the room and use up all the money.
Right.
Any other questions? John?
So just one more question, which is that as we look at how the Star Campus is going to get built out over the next several years, and given that, as you were saying earlier, the stormwater drainage goes through the Star Campus, would there be any advantages for the university building a stormwater retention pond in the Star Campus? And that's something they should be thinking about before they put all these buildings in.
Yep. So part of their master plan is the stream that goes through, it's the Silver Brook. It used to actually be a stream through there, and it's now in a pipe. Their master plan calls to daylighting that stream, making an actual floodplain and opening it up and restoring the stream. That will improve the stormwater conditions a lot. You create floodplain storage somewhere for it to flood where it's not in somebody's driveway or in the street. As far as their stormwater, basically anything they do out there is going to improve what it was before, because it was basically paved property line to property line at one point. During our analysis, the amount of stormwater coming into the Star Campus, I think, was about 1/10 of what's coming out, or something like that. There's a ton of water coming off the Star Campus. So as they build out, they're going to be creating green spaces, and they're ripping up all the concrete and things. So I think that project, anything they do out there, is going to be an improvement over what it is today.
Part of the Delaware sediment stormwater regulations, which govern how they develop the Star Campus. It's considered a redevelopment, so essentially what they need to do is reintroduce, for each project, 30% of, say, a paved area. If you just have a parking lot, you take 30% of that and turn it into a green area. So they automatically reduce the impervious cover by 30%. In their defense, they have obviously a lot of paving. So this first phase up front, they're using a lot of, basically remediation to cover their stormwater requirements. So as they move further back, they'll have to get into a little more structural improvements and water quality improvements. So chances are they're going to develop it in a fashion where it'll be either underground storage or rain gardens and things like that. But obviously they have the resources and the knowledge base to make those things happen. Landscape architects, and obviously the Ag College being across the street has a vibrant program for that. So.
Yeah.
One
Yes.
quick question.
Okay.
So assuming the referendum passes and the Rodney project is approved, what's the timeline for construction and completion?
Do you want to go to the, I think it's,
Next one up. No, it's
one
the one
more.
after, or one before, or one after.
there you go.
There it is.
So it would be completed in 2020 if we stay on schedule. So we'd start with the end of this year, we'd be doing asbestos remediation and some PCBs, nothing
minor.
too significant, and we'd start demolition. Most of the demolition construction would happen in 2019, and then 2020 would be kind of clean up and some of the park's features and things like that. But we're pretty much ready to go. Yes, sir.
I have not a question, but a comment. I think every time you go to a referendum, you hold your heart in your hand for a while.
Mhm.
And I think this is a good time for those of us who are pleased with the services that the city has provided to think about circumstances under which the city has rendered extraordinary service, and to write letters to the newspaper
Thank you.
about some of those situations and our high regard for the city's response. Of course, that has to be done within the next week or two.
Not a whole lot of
No
time.
later than that.
Another great thing, it would be talking to your neighbors.
Yeah.
We've held now 5 of these plus the public hearing, and we talked to a lot of people, but that's probably still only a very small portion of the residents in the city. A lot of people don't see it, don't know what's going
What
on.
do you think the turnout is going to be for this referendum? You
It-
talk about small proportion.
Yeah, if I'm going to be realistic, it's going to be very low because it's not lined up with the city election. It's June 19th. So obviously we can't tell you to vote for it. We can just tell you what the projects are and why we think they're important. But obviously our fear is that people like to show up to say no to things. But hopefully we'll get a good turnout, and that's why we've been trying to do as much as we can. You'll see, you'll be getting a mailer soon. I think it's being printed now that has a lot of the summary information that's going to go to every property in the city, property owner in the city. So hopefully that will improve some of the knowledge. But yeah, talk to your neighbors, send them to the website, get them to give us a call, or we'll talk to anyone.
Tim's
Hopefully
going to
not
sit on the
for
roof of the
2
building
hours,
until
but,
June 20th.
I'm not going to shave it.
Yes, sir.
All right, so I'm going to expose myself and really sound like an idiot here. But if there is low turnout,
Mhm.
what governs whether the referendum passes or not?
So it is just 50, whoever gets more than 50%. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's not a quorum.
Yeah,
Be
there's-
11 to
Yeah.
10, yeah.
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 So,
All right, thank you so
yeah,
much.
thank you everybody for coming
Yeah,
out.
thank
We'll
you.
stick around. If anyone has questions they didn't want to ask in front of the crowd, we'll be here for a little while. All right,
This is great.
Thanks for
So
coming out.
clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So much work.
Yeah, there's nothing else to do.
Yeah. We have 3 of these next week. So.
Well, good luck.